What is going on? My name is Nick Hanna. I'm a pro natural bodybuilder and a natural bodybuilding judge. In this video, I'm going to go through peak week. Go through all of those misconceptions that you might have when it comes to peak week. Far too many people that I see have a really good contest preparation and then mess it up and undo all of that really good work in the peak week. Think about all of those misconceptions that you might have, whether it's, sodium, water manipulation, carb loading, and all of these crazy different things that you should, or people tell you that you should be doing in a peak week. I'm going to dispel all of those myths and tell you exactly what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. Because ultimately, we want to bring our best physique to stage. We don't want to ruin the entire contest prep, which you've worked so hard for, with messing it up at that last minute. So let's start with what the peak week is and isn't. The misconception is that peak week is some magical week where everything happens and where, all of a sudden you go from out of shape to contest lean in a matter of a week. That's not the case. The reality is, and sorry to break it to you, if you're not in shape before peak week started, you're probably not going to be ready anyway. Peak week isn't going to fix that. If you're still fat, you're still fat. The goal of a peak week isn't actually fat loss. If you haven't dropped off the fat by now, you're probably not going to be ready. But under the proviso that you are ready and you are in shape, that last week, it's not for fat loss. It's really not for fat loss. The things that we want to be thinking about is reducing inflammation, reducing our stress, and ultimately bringing our physique back to life. Simplicity is everything when it comes to a peak week. Keep things stable, keep things stress-free, and avoid the chaos and the stresses that can ultimately come with the nature of a peak week and leading into a show. One of those misconceptions is cutting out sodium or limiting it. Now, I do understand why people think that, because people think that if you were to cut out sodium, you reduce any water retention that might come along with having sodium and consuming sodium within your diet. What actually happens is your sodium actually helps you control and manage your muscle contractions, your pumps, your fullness to your physique. If you cut out sodium, your physique is going to look stringy and flat. I've seen it. I've seen it on show days. People are telling me they've cut out sodium 4 days out. And then all of a sudden I'm like, where did your muscle go? Why are you looking so flat and stringy? A general rule of thumb that I say to people, it's not necessarily a specific amount of sodium in grams, it's more so keeping things consistent. What have you been doing up until now in terms of sodium intake? I don't necessarily think through a contest prep, you need to be tracking your sodium to the T, to the microgram every meal. But in those last couple weeks, I think you need to find what your baseline is. Find your baseline sodium intake, whether it is sodium throughout the entirety of the day, or whether it's a sodium per meal, and then replicating that. And if you look good based on that amount of sodium intake, well then continue that and run that all the way up until the show. There's rarely any circumstances where I think sodium manipulation has its part in natural bodybuilding. The next mistake I see is cutting water. Sorry, I just needed to clap there and I felt like it was dramatic enough to use the clap. Cutting water, I see it all the time. And my clients or people that I see competing ask me that question. It's like, when should I be cutting out water? You shouldn't be cutting out water. Water is required to saturate your muscles and actually provide that fullness. You're ultimately gonna look flat and stringy if you cut out water. Particularly when you're backstage and you're pumping up, you need that. Obviously you need your sodium and you need carbohydrates, but you need your water. You need water to be fueling yourself and going through your muscles to pump up those muscles backstage before jumping on stage. Often there's the train of thought that you should be water loading. In my view, that just ultimately leads to unnecessary stress and can backfire. It can really backfire, particularly if you haven't done it before. If you haven't actually experienced it or you haven't experimented with it, how do you know what it's gonna look like? You're just throwing darts in the air, aren't you? And you're not hitting 180. The key point when it comes to water is that muscles are predominantly water. They will shrink if they don't have the water in there. Yes, I don't want you to be sculling liters and liters and liters before you get on stage. Of course not. But in the lead up to the show, in the lead up to peak week, like sodium, I like to get a baseline for my clients in terms of what are you actually consuming on a daily basis. Is it 3 liters? Is it 4 liters? Is it 5 liters? Is it 6 liters? It doesn't necessarily matter. It just matters that you're consistent with it. You know, if you know that in the lead up to peak week or in peak week itself, you know that you drink 5 liters of water a day. Okay, well, when do you consume that? And how do you look after consuming that amount of fluid? How do you feel? Can you still get a pump in the gym? Do you get those contractions in the gym? And how do you, yeah, as I said, ultimately feel? Can we replicate that on show day? So consistency is key. Consistency is key. I'll say it once more. Consistency is key. The third mistake is over-carbing up or thinking you need more carbs than you actually do. Particularly when it comes to natural bodybuilding. You know, you might see online that you've got those IFBB pro bodybuilders slamming 1,000 grams of carbohydrates in the days leading up to the show. But reality, you're not a 120 kilo bodybuilder, are you? Chances are you're 70, 80 kilos on stage. So does your body really need the same amount of carbohydrates as a 120 kilo, not natural, enhanced bodybuilder? Probably not. So with that in mind, often people think they need more carbohydrates, and that's probably because they're in the false sense of where they're at. They're hungry. They think they need more carbs and they think they're flatter than they are. Reality, they're not. One of the problems I see with people is that they often rapidly backload their carbohydrates towards the back end of the week. Now, this can become problematic, particularly if you're thinking, great, I'm starting my carb up 3 days or even 2 days or even the day out. What happens if you spill? What happens if you spill in terms of carbohydrates and you load a certain amount of carbohydrates and you spill over the next day? You don't have long to rectify that. So my advice, and what I've done with numerous clients and what I did with Ivan at the most recent WMBF Melbourne show, is we did a bit of a linear load. We knew what his baseline carbohydrates were. So on a training day, his baseline was 250 grams of carbohydrates, and that's what we were running for the few weeks prior to peak week, and 200 grams on a non-training day. To start the week, and at 6 days out, we increased carbohydrates by 50 grams on each day. And then we progressed up by increasing by 100 grams of carbohydrates. And then we were monitoring body weight, we were monitoring how we were feeling, we were monitoring the visuals and how we were actually looking. Then it progressed up until 2 days out, where it was our last training session, and we had 400 grams of carbohydrates, which was 150 up on baseline. Now, that gave me the visual look that we wanted. And to give you some more practical advice, we knew that from there, expenditure was going to be quite low. Glycogen stores were going to remain high, and we weren't going to be burning through them. Hence why the day prior, saying 1 day out, we didn't actually need to load that many carbohydrates. I think we ended up having to do 250 grams of carbohydrates a day prior, and it gave us that crispy look come show morning. So as you can see, a linear load is much better because you can, in my opinion, generally speaking, you can monitor things day by day and progressively increase carbohydrates, manipulate your protein, manipulate your fats, keep your sodium and water consistent throughout the week, and just titrate up as required. And if all of a sudden you see yourself spill a little bit, okay, we'll just pull back a little bit. Or if we need a little bit more and we're flattening out a bit more, we jump up a bit. And it's the easiest way to progressively increase your glycogen stores as opposed to rapidly depleting them and rapidly building them back up. That is where you have that potential to not bring your best look to stage. When it comes to carb loading and what's the best approach for you, is it a front load, i.e. more carbohydrates the front of the week, or a back load, more at the back end of the week, or a linear approach throughout the entirety of the week? They all work. They actually all work. I'm not here one to say, one is better than the other. What I would say is don't go experimenting in peak week. If something hasn't worked in the past or you haven't trialed something, a linear load is probably your safest bet. I would always try to experiment. If you're ready a couple weeks out, or you're on track, maybe we'll experiment with a bit of a carb up over a couple of days and see how your body reacts. How many carbohydrates can your body handle? How many carbohydrates does your body need to fill up? Again, they're questions that you and your coach should answer and should be able to answer and experiment in the weeks leading up to a contest prep. Another thing I see is people training far too hard, and I use that term loosely, training to complete failure, absolutely taking those 50-50 reps in the days leading up to a contest prep. You know, peak week itself should be designed to reduce inflammation, and those 50-50 reps are ultimately going to, you know, put added stress on your body, added fatigue to your system, which it's probably not going to bring the best look to stage, and it actually is the opposite of what you're wanting to achieve in a peak week. The purpose of training during a peak week isn't necessarily to build muscle. Likewise, it's not to lose fat in the peak week. So you want to still make sure that you can maintain a pump, still get some blood moving into the system, and ultimately you want to try and shuttle the nutrients to where you wanted to shuttle them to your muscles. A good idea in a peak week is also to be ideally training when you think you're going to be on stage. So let's say you're about to step on stage at midday, let's say on a Saturday when it's show day. How about we, if we can, train at around that time with the same amount of meals, same amount of fluid, so then you can take your post-workout shots and say, okay, I look really good in this time, let's replicate that when it comes to show day. So there's no uncertainty when it comes to the look that you're going to be presenting on stage. The same goes for cardio, steps, output, whatever you're doing in your cardio or step regime. Cardio, generally, you probably want to taper that off. There's no need, particularly when it comes to, let's say, bodybuilding, or depending on what the cardio you are doing, you want to be reducing inflammation in your legs. You want to be making sure that the detail comes out in those legs, those quads, for most categories, and just overarching your physique. You know, you slam in an hour on the Stairmaster or the treadmill or incline walk or elliptical or spin bike, that's going to inflame your legs. That's going to inflame your legs, your physique, and we want to eliminate that when it comes to the peak week. Likewise, from a step count perspective, more than likely you want to reduce your step count. Because as we said at the start, peak week is not a fat loss week. For the most part, we're wanting to reduce inflammation so we can bring our best physique to stage. And a bit of a bonus tip here to round out is peak week, you shouldn't be trialing anything new. You know, it should just be a repetition of what you've done in the past. You know, when I think of, you know, don't add any stupid fat burners or diuretics, particularly if you're a natural athlete, who knows if those are banned substances, you know, free, are they banned substance free, and are they even allowed to be used in your contest prep? Likewise, when it comes to food, you know, particularly when you're carb loading, you know, I would ideally like to stick with the foods that you're used to. You know, if you haven't been using a certain carbohydrate source throughout your prep, why incorporate it and run the risk of your body not reacting well to it? Particularly when you're in contest shape, your body is very responsive, either good or bad. So why try and incorporate something and run the risk of it backfiring? Keep it simple. Peak week's almost a funny time because it's the time for refinement. You know, you've worked so hard the contest preparation and it's been go, 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 go the entirety of the time. But now peak week, it's actually a time to sort of step back. The work's been done. You've had time to reflect, and it's your time to literally put your feet up, because the entirety of the contest prep, you've been thinking, let's do more. More is better. More, 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 more. When now it's sort of like, okay, well, let's take a step back, chill out, pop the feet up, relax. The work is done. The work is done, which is almost the hardest part, because most of you in the contest prep, you've been go, go, go. But now it's sort of like, hey, just chill out. And that is what is going to elicit the best response for your physique, and your physique will thank you for it. So these are the common misconceptions and common things that I see and mistakes that I see so many people make when it comes to a contest preparation. It's unfortunate for me to see when people ruin their physiques in peak week. If you're looking good leading up to peak week, why try and throw a Hail Mary? Hail Mary. It just doesn't work, does it? It'll ruin your physique, and you'll regret it. So work closely with your coach, don't experiment, and go with what works. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you do have any questions, please let me know. This has been a peak week misconception debunking myths. So hope you've enjoyed it. Until next time, keep it real.